Welcome to the Pipeline and People podcast powered by Versorix, the show where boutique firm leaders trade less admin for more advisory. Each week, we share actionable tactics to keep your client pipeline full and your team performing at its best. I'm your host, Jaden Parisi. Let's dive in. Today's guest is Bernie Haffey, president and founder of Haffey Co, a consulting firm that helps organizations achieve world-class customer, employee, and financial results through their proven high-performance management system. Bernie, welcome. Could you kick us off with a quick look at your background? What inspired you to start Haffey Co?
Thanks, Jaden. I came to Haffey Co following a close to 30-year career as an operating executive in the MedTech space. I've been CEO of two privately held companies, one in endoscopic suturing, one in surgical ophthalmology. Before that, I was chief commercial officer of two publicly traded companies in MedTech. And along the way, about 25 years ago, I learned a management system that transformed one of the companies I worked at, a company called Summit Technology. And I've been, the last 10 years or so, I've been helping other companies adopt that high performance management system.
Amazing. That's quite the impressive background. What does that system actually look like, in action for a client?
So it starts with inputs. If you were to implement the system, the first thing that we would do is look at customer satisfaction for your product or service, usually through surveys, sometimes through interviews. We would also look at employee engagement, likewise through in both of those surveys, we're looking at willingness to recommend the company to, in the case of an employee, a friend or relative, in the case of a customer, a qualified other. And so those inputs, together with the voice of the shareholder, are used to facilitate the first steps of the management system with the leadership team, usually in an offsite session. In that session, we build out a one-page strategic plan for the company that's based on the Pareto principle, or kind of the 20% of the items that would close 80% of your strategic gap, kind of the breakthrough opportunities. And then we agree on execution. Who owns each one of these vital few priorities, and what are the next steps, or what is the methodology those teams are going to take to solve for those vital few problems and opportunities.
Do you use like NPS or Qualtrics for any of that?
Yeah, well, NPS is a derivative of willingness to recommend, right? So if you look at the statement that NPS is based on, it's a statement that usually reads, "I would willingly recommend Ford as a company to do business with," right? And that's either on a 10-point or a 5-point Likert scale. Bain conceived this NPS sort of calculation of willingness to recommend quite a while ago, based on their observation that survey data normally distributes around agree versus neutral, right, on a 5-point Likert scale. And said, well, if it's normally distributed around agree, let's call agree neutral, let's call neutral and everything below that negative. And so it's the same survey data. It's just a different way of calculating, and it can be very helpful for, let's say, a company gets to 95% willing to recommend. They might think, well, we're there, we've got no more opportunities. But if you look at promoters, you might find that you only have, you have a 50% net score on promoters, and then you're kind of like, wow, there's a lot of opportunity to grow, especially grow those promoters that become kind of an extension of the company's marketing and selling efforts.
Okay, interesting. I haven't seen it skewed like that before. It's a good approach.
Mm-hmm.
So for the rest of the call, we're going to go over the topic of today is, why firm owners struggle to niche down. So we're going to go over why so many capable leaders hesitate to niche, the hidden costs of staying broad, how you've seen clarity, and then some practical advice.
Yeah.
Sound good?
Well, yep, absolutely. I'd say, maybe a couple levels to that. In my consulting practice, I focus almost exclusively on newly appointed CEOs. So that's, the niche, right? And those, I like to say there are 4 things a newly appointed CEO, must do. Uh, you know, following sort of the listening tour and all that kind of typical stuff to understand the business. But following that, they must affirm a long range vision and set of goals for the company. I like to see that in sort of a 3 to 5 year look. That's motivational for employees to understand, what is the future state for the company? How great is it going to look when we get there? And so that's number one. Number two is a culture. How must we behave along the way to achieve that aspirational future state? And those are generally distilled as a set of shared values. They're generally not sort of, feel good things. They're things that are stretch in nature that fit that particular organization and that particular culture. Thirdly, is a set of vital few priorities we talked about a little bit earlier. And those vital few priorities are organized around customer satisfaction. So what are the one or two most important things can we focus on to improve satisfaction of our customers? Ditto employee engagement, and then thirdly, shareholder satisfaction. So each of those is a branch, if you will, in our success tree or our one-page strategic plan. And so a great organization might have 4 or 5, usually no more than 6, vital few priorities that are visible, that are understood by everybody in the organization, and that are are transformational, are breakthrough in nature. And then in the fourth bucket, kind of the secret sauce is how are we going to execute on those 4 to 6 vital few priorities? I mentioned assigning leaders and core teams, diverse teams, and following a structured teach and facilitate a structured process, the ancestor of which is scientific method. And it simply says that, it emphasizes the methodology and the team process along with the result. And that's, that's a separation from many businesses that, do the first 3 buckets I talked about: vision, mission, values, vital few, and then go do it. Well, this is more, those things, and then not just go do it, but go, form a team, a diverse team, write a problem or opportunity statement, align with your stakeholders. That's step one. Step two, go insanely deep into the current state. Sometimes that involves certain tools like root cause or process mapping. And then thirdly, the future state and the goal and the plan to get there. And then the fourth step is monitoring execution through team stoplight reporting. So it's all very prescribed and organized in a way that it is structured and it becomes a common language in your business. So if you're a great football team or hockey team, you're up in Canada, you have a system through which you play and win games. And one of the elements of the system, in addition to structure and logic, is a common language, right? Everybody calls a certain play the same thing on the field, right? And as simple as that sounds, a lot of companies don't have common language. They have, different leaders have different languages and different approaches, and it becomes a lot less, those organizations are less efficient and less effective as a result of not having a system. And just to finish on the sports analogy, I think we've all seen cases where a team of B or B plus athletes in an A system can beat a team of superstar athletes playing as individuals. And that's sort of a very simple way of saying, what is the power of a system? What is the power of common language? What is the power of structure? The power is that I can accomplish world-class things with maybe, maybe B or B plus players. It's unrealistic to populate an organization, with all fives. The world sort of doesn't usually work that way as you scale a business.
Yeah, for sure. Not sure if you follow hockey, but Toronto doesn't really win games.
That's true. I do follow it, and I'm sorry about the recent end to their
embarrassment.
Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I like that analogy, and it's very good. So you mentioned that your niche or niche is newly appointed CEOs. That's very specific. How do you find the flow of new leads comes? Do people reach out to you? Do you reach out to them? Does having that specific niche kind of limit your capacity to find new clients?
Yeah, I think, well, to answer your question, most of it comes to me through referral, through word of mouth. I haven't, had to do much outreach. I've recently been doing a little bit more kind of tracking through an industry newsletter when a newly appointed CEO is announced, and then connecting with that individual and having conversations about where kind of those priorities and whether a system like this would make sense to them. I think the reason that I focus on that niche is that to bring in this system, it's ideal that you have a blank sheet of paper. It's ideal that there isn't already a formed strategy and methods of execution. And when you have a new leader, new CEO, they kind of have the, looking for the right word, sort of the charter to make those changes and start with that clean sheet of paper. I also find that is the most rewarding place for me as a consultant and as an advisor. It's exciting, it's new, it's you kind of have a very receptive leader and leadership team. I tend to, even though I am a consultant now, I still sort of generally see myself as an operating executive that now does consulting, and I get very passionate about the outcomes for my clients. And so part of it is that it's what kind of motivates me to do my best work. I'd say a smaller is sort of a sub niche, and it's often coincident with the new CEO is a is a turnaround or a transformation, right? In most cases, unless it's a well planned succession, a board brings a new CEO in because things aren't, maybe going as well as they would like to see them going, right? So that, and that's also kind of a fun and challenging place to come into a company that's not optimal and bring it up to a world class level of performance.
For sure. When you're doing, you're working with a client and you're working on their strategic plan and using the high performance management system, have you noticed maybe that they are resisting to niche down? And if so, what have you said to them?
Yeah. Well, I think that gets back to this whole concept of vital few. If you're going to put your strategy on a page, it has to be a Pareto of your strategy. In other words, what are the 20% of the items that are going to close 80% of our strategic gap? It's not an exercise in putting 100% of the items that are going to close 100% of the gap. And so that requires a certain amount of discipline. It requires a certain amount of focus on products, on markets, on services um, that I think fit your definition of niching down, right? Being really, really great at a few things, a few vital few areas of focus is what transforms a company or takes a company from one place to another versus trying to be everything to everybody or do or where everything's a priority, right?
Yeah, no, for sure.
Does that make sense?
Does, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, to build on that, like some leaders will worry that choosing a niche means, saying no to good work or kind of denying clients. Like, what do you have to say to that fear with these new CEOs that are just coming in? They want to prove to the board, show that they're doing well, getting clients.
Yeah. Well, so a couple different definitions of strategy that I like. One is the most important things relative to everything else, right? That's kind of the vital few idea of strategy. Another definition that it is on along the same lines is what are we not going to do, right?
Yeah.
What markets are we not going to go into? What indications for our product are we not, and so that, so I think having the discipline to say no is critical. An example of that is, years ago, I was chief commercial officer of a company called Intralase in Southern California. We launched the first femtosecond laser in the world for blade-free LASIK eye surgery, and it was a $500,000 laser with $150 per eye, disposable. We launched in the U.S. initially, got some, built up a solid initial business in the U.S. and then we went international. We went to Japan first. We then went to certain Western European countries based on approval, and eventually to Korea and a few other Asian markets. And during this whole period, we were asked by individual surgeons in places like Brazil or even Argentina, Mexico, hey, we'd like to, please sell us a laser. And we said over and over for years, no, we're not selling and marketing and servicing lasers in Latin America yet, right? And by saying no and having a very methodical way of rolling it out, we're able to ensure the quality of that customer experience sequentially, right? Because to start in a new market, let's say starting in Germany, we had to hire people, we had to train people, we had to put a parts depot in there so that we could rapidly service and maintain the highest level of customer satisfaction for those customers in Germany. And imagine trying to do that all over the world all at once. It would be a complete, and sadly, I see a lot of companies that do that don't say no, that, everything's in order and they see the immediate sort of benefit of the sale and making some money on that transaction, but aren't looking at sort of the longer term implications of that strategy or lack of strategy, really, you could say. So I enjoyed saying no, to the markets that weren't part of we had a very well defined 3-year rollout plan for international at this company. It was a very successful company. It was a venture-backed company that sold for $800 million, Abbott Medical Optics. So, that's kind of one example as it relates to geographies. But you also have the same company. Interestingly, the laser had 5 or 6 different potential indications. As I mentioned earlier, it could do LASIK flaps, but it could also do corneal therapeutic procedures where it's cutting deeper into the eye and solving for corneal disease. It had the potential to change the power of the eye. It had 4 or 5 different indications. We had a competitor in Germany, and it was a small company, and they were pursuing all of those all simultaneously, and they never solved for any single one of them. Whereas we said, hey, you know what? We're going to be the best at this one thing. We're going to be the best at creating LASIK flaps. We're going to ignore all these other potential indications, because if we don't do that, we're not going to be the best at this one thing. And we had achieved 1 million eyes, 1 million corneal dissections before any of the incumbent laser technologies even did one procedure. And a lot of that, I think, success was that singular focus on being really, really good at one thing.
It's a great story and sounds like a incredibly impressive machine and even more impressive business.
Yeah, it was.
Okay, we got a few minutes left here, so we're gonna move on to. I have a quick rapid fire, a few questions here that just off the top of your head, whatever comes to mind.
Okay.
All right. What's the biggest myth about niching?
Biggest myth about niching. I really don't know. I don't know the answer to that question.
That's okay. That's all good. I can cut it out. We're gonna edit everything after. We'll move on to the next one. What is one shift a leader could try this week to gain clarity on strategy or targeting?
I think one thing, if they haven't done a great customer survey, that would be a fastball. Likewise, if they haven't executed an employee survey. That would be another fastball. I can't imagine running a business without a clear understanding of the satisfaction of those two key stakeholders.
Favorite leadership lesson from, your startup or scale experience, just anything that you've learned?
Well, I've learned the power of process, the power of this of a system, the power of certain quality principles. I'd say notably that quality is measured in the voice of the customer, right? It's not measured internally. I think that's that's a key lesson. And then back just briefly to process, I have learned that everybody works hard, every company works hard, but that if you want to apply continuous improvement, you can't apply it to activity. You have to apply it to a process, even if the process isn't perfect. When you're launching it, at least you're launching with some structure that then you can simplify and continue to improve.
Yeah, absolutely. And finally, what's the best piece of advice that you've been given, personal or
That's
business?
Yeah, I'd say that in the vein of this conversation, if everything is important, nothing is important concept, and I think that covers a number of things that we covered today.
Okay, great. Bernie, this was fantastic. For those listening that want to explore more about Haffey Co. or the HBMS framework, where can they reach you?
Bernie at haffeyco.com. That's BERNIE at HAFFEYCO.com.
Okay, great. If this conversation sparked an idea, send it to a founder you might know who will be stuck in the crossroads. Or if there's any newly appointed CEOs feel free to share the link. Until next time, I'm Jaden Parisi. This is the Pipeline of People podcast.